Great to see everybody joining. This event is co-hosted by the Open Gov Hub, which is a dynamic meeting place in Washington, D.C., co-founded by Global Integrity and by Development Gateway. The Hub brings together 50 organizations across the world working on government transparency, accountability, and civic participation. My name is Jorge Flores, and I lead work related to use of data at Global Integrity. And when we found out about this book, we were really excited to host a conversation on it and to help promote it and launch it. It covers issues that are at the heart of the work that we do, such as understanding open data in local context and in the practices and the culture that people have, the power dynamics and the relationships that data can enhance or can help shift. And it also includes many things on practices and everything we will be hearing more about from the speakers. So I won't bother too much in the introduction. So I'll pass the word to Danny so he can talk to us a little bit more about the book. Basically, we're going to have a quick couple of remarks, then we're going to go to the presentations by the panelists, and then we're going to have a question and answer session at the end, moderated by Danny and me. Please put your questions in the function for questions in Zoom, and we will be either answering them as they come or holding them for the questions and answer session at the end. Danny.
Yeah, thank you, Jorge, and also a warm welcome from us, the editors. Before we start with the talks, maybe let us say a couple of things about the book, how it came about, and what we also think is the contribution to open data research for the future. Jorge already mentioned a couple of things. So the book itself, or the book chapters, originated from the Open Data Research Symposium, which was held in 2018 in Argentina. We also have some of the organizers from back then here, for example, Stefan Verhulst and Nico Cañares and François van Schalkwijk. So a shout out to them as well for laying the groundwork or the foundation of the book. When we were screening the research papers for shared topics, and when we tried to find out, okay, what is the common ground they have, we found that instead of studying the mere effects or the impacts of open data sets, we found that they are rather moving towards data settings and how data or open data is situated. And this shift away from the impact of data sets towards studying data settings is very productive and needed for the future research, we think, because settings open up quite useful research perspectives. Settings involve usually a situation, a question, a need, a problem, something to get a lag to get away with, for example. Settings also situate open data in practices in clear locations, as well as in ecosystems and in infrastructures. So a couple of the chapters we have also address practices, specifically open data practices, and discuss the dual role, for example, of data literacy in practices. Data literacy can be at once, for example, be a resource to upskill people. That's the usual way we think about data literacy in relation to practices. And some of the contributions also ask what are the enabling factors, for example, for data literacy to be improved. But what we find more interesting is a more implicit point here that data practices also are always entangled with the functioning of institutions and mutually related, if you want. So a study of open data practices also allows us to critically investigate how institutions function and perform, and who they represent and who they leave out, for example. And perhaps that's most strikingly discussed in the health data reporting chapter that François van Schalkwijk was writing for this book, but also in other cases, for example, the data journalism chapter we have. Maybe, Patrick, you want to say a bit more about locations and moving from global to local?
Right, so thank you very much, Danny. That's a very good summary, I think. But just to add, we have chapters that interrogate the context that open data is implemented and practiced, okay? Because there's a constant need to move from abstract considerations of global open data to the specificities of local implementations, okay, regional, country, or subnational levels. Okay, so we have, yeah, for example, there's a paper that takes in data from 25 countries across sub-Saharan Africa, okay, to find how associations between government data, accountability, and self-delivery, yeah, occur. And then there's some that go all the way to Latin America, Paraguay, for instance, and examines kind of open data, especially in the realm of public procurement payment processes. Okay, now at the subnational level, we have chapters from Michael Canaris, for example, in the Philippines, Indonesia, and the role and scope of local government in implementing open government partnerships, and the commitments in that regard. And of course, we have a paper from that region as well, that's Asian region, again at subnational level, Indonesia, and how specifically through action research, open data, an open data project was realized. We hear from those as well. So from global to local, I'll probably just stop here and ask Anna to talk more about the book.
Thanks, Patrick. So another component and theme that we found in the book that was really important was open data ecosystems. So what facilitates opening up data? We found that several chapters in our book examine open data ecosystems to understand how these can be infrastructured for broader socioeconomic benefits. Here, ecosystems play a strategic role for situating open data because they consist of gateways and gatekeepers. And so I'm just going to talk to you about a few chapters that we see this happening. As it was mentioned previously, Francois' chapter, Connecting Flows and Places, flows of open data from and within hyperlocal communities in Tanzania. This looks at how health-related data travels in a data ecosystems between public institutions and civic actors. So here, infrastructural elements matter because they shape blockages, breaks, and switchers and connectors of data flows. These infrastructural elements are also important because they are part of databases that connect to data exchange, reporting procedures to digitize and share data. So all of this is really interconnected to existing information systems and flows that are just data, not necessarily yet open data. As well, so what also matters are trained social conventions and incentives and disincentives to report and share data across local, regional, and national scales, which is very strongly a part of the socioeconomic implications. The chapter also takes a closer look at how data flows are shaped by organizational interests and how they create inherent conflicting interests, exclusion, as well as power dynamics, which again goes towards moving away from just looking at data sets and situating open data in different contexts. We see also how open data ecosystems unfold in the chapter that Eveline will present for us today. So I won't go too much into detail on that, but it's important to note that it's a really key chapter on the implementation of a decentralized open data publishing strategy. So in here, the relationship between platform architecture, privacy by design, and technical performance and user perceived satisfaction with traffic routing apps really plays a key role in the open data ecosystem. And last but not least, building a framework for analysis of factors to creation and growth of an open data ecosystem. Edson, Nicolau, and Violetta propose a framework for analyzing and exploring the factors that can influence the economic and social sustainability of open government data ecosystems specifically. So this information flow is examined through the value chain, especially data reuse in emerging countries, which is important to understand the needed governance for the construction and sustainability of open government data ecosystems that could help society obtain greater benefit from this analysis, to understand how government resources are used more efficiently, but also hopefully more effectively as well. So said that, I pass it on to Danny to introduce our first two authors.
Thank you, Anna. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Natalia Domagala, who is also not only author, but has a dual role as the fourth editor in our team. Natalia Domagala leads on data ethics policy at the Cabinet Office, the government digital service in the UK. She previously advised on open government and open data policies for the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport in the UK, and implemented open data challenges for 360 Giving. She has research across many fields, experience in anthropology, gender, civic tech, and economic development. And she received her Master of Science in Local Economic Development from the London School of Economics and her BA in Anthropology and Media from Goldsmiths University. So, Natalia, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Danny, and thanks everyone for attending. So my paper focuses on open data in practice and situates open data within the broader context of the ICT-enabled empowerment of women. Can I have the next slide, please? It is common knowledge that empowering women creates wider socioeconomic benefits for the country, and technology is very often seen as a tool to achieve it. However, many recognize that risks that unequal implementation of those new technologies presents, particularly for women and for people who have less access and less control over ICT, that leads them to being further marginalized within the economic system. And the concern is that this digital divide can deepen even further if we don't address it. And one solution that could increase the number of women interested in technology and then able to shape its future is creating grassroots women-only ICT skills programs. And this chapter looks at the potential of ICT skills trainings and open data, a tool commonly used during those trainings to empower women within the male-dominated ICT industry in Kosovo. I explored the following questions in the research, as you can see here, but in this presentation, I'll only focus on the strengths and limitations of open data for the empowerment of women. And my case study was based on two organizations, Girls Coding Kosovo and Open Data Kosovo. They are, at the time of writing this paper, they were led by the same person, Blerta Taci, and those two organizations shared the office and worked on most of their projects together. So Girls Coding Kosovo started because the founder, Blerta, noticed that there is a gap between the number of female IT students and the number of women she saw in the workplace. And the organization aims to increase the number of women interested in programming, they also provide opportunities for them to gain skills and experience in the industry. Their projects target young women from 18 to 25-year-olds, primarily but not exclusively from the ICT sector. And they covered a whole range of skills that are currently in demand in the market while promoting technology-motivated civic engagement and open data-driven solutions. Open Data Kosovo is a civic technology organization promoting open data and governance. And the portfolio of both organizations includes projects where female residents design digital tools to address various problems in their municipalities. And in this research, I used qualitative methodology and I conducted 20 semi-structured face-to-face interviews with participants and organizers of the programs. And the majority of my interviewees were women under 30. And to fully understand the importance of the work these organizations have been doing, we need to appreciate the local context in Kosovo. Next slide, please. So Kosovo is the youngest, both historically and demographically, country in Europe. It's also one of the poorest, and some of the challenges they're facing are inadequate human capital, poor quality of education, and low levels of digitalization of the economy. And this paper argues that women are particularly affected by these problems. They are disadvantaged in the political, economic, and social sphere, as well as underrepresented in public administration and in the ICT sector in Kosovo. And Kosovo really is a striking case where technology, digital skills, and open data could form a partial solution to all those issues, including poverty, youth and female unemployment, and weak governance. And the ICT industry has been recognized as having the most potential for future development. Next slide, please. I started my literature review with defining empowerment. And the notion of empowerment is really fuzzy, very hard to define. Empowerment is relational, context-dependent, constantly evolves. It can be temporary. So in the paper, I build a conceptual framework that merges definitions of empowerment from feminist theory and economics with the findings of ICT skills literature to explore the effectiveness of ICT programs in empowering women in four spheres. So social, political, psychological, and technological. Next slide, please. In the paper, I go into much more detail on all 4 aspects of empowerment, but in the interest of time, I'll briefly describe the findings from literature on civic and political empowerment only. So according to the literature, ICT trainings can influence political participation in 2 ways. They provide information that was previously not available, and they bring together larger groups of women mobilized around mutual concerns, which can spark further involvement. However, this link between ICT skills and civic and political engagement is really not straightforward. And the existing studies offer no recommendation on how to interest those ICT communities in political and civic engagement. Tech-enabled communities have also been criticized as disconnected from governmental practices. In the paper, I present findings on the sources of disempowerment and empowerment for both ICT skills programs and open data, but now I'll only present the open data part. Next slide, please. So open data becomes the key element that links civic engagement and empowerment to the ICT skills initiatives. Through open data-driven projects on civic tech, Open Data Kosovo and Girls Coding Kosovo create a platform for young women to engage with their municipalities in an active way and to produce their technology. Working on open data-driven solutions results in a rise in female civic engagement. Women from the ICT sector, previously unaware of the civic aspects of technology, now take the initiative within their municipalities. Open data also encourages women in technology to utilize their new skills for greater social benefits. And just bringing women together is insufficient to stimulate civic or political engagement. It's open data, it's involving them with open data and civic technology projects that is the key to actually sparking this engagement. And this results in women setting the direction for digital development of their governments through designing and building the tools that the governments need. Next slide, please. In terms of limitations, unfortunately, the awareness of open data in Kosovo in general is still relatively low. And the use of open data creates a desire to be more politically active, but there is a lack of tools and guidance on how to achieve it. Lack of skills is also one of the obstacles to fully utilize the opportunities open data offers. And overall low digital advancement of local governments hinders the potential of open data to stimulate participatory policymaking. There are also gaps in the available data and problems with data quality. Next slide, please. And basically what they achieved in Kosovo is that they combined technology, people, and open data. Governments lack digital infrastructure, community lacks skills and interest in civic and political matters. So they trained a community of women to build digital infrastructure for the public sector. And for open data to be truly empowering, public participation and social engagement should be normalized, and citizens should be involved in designing responses to the needs of the public sector. And this creates benefits for the governments. So crowdsourcing of services and content can improve the government's effectiveness and enhance policymaking by deploying the talent from outside the public sector to use and develop projects with open data. And although ICT skills programs increase civic awareness and participation, perhaps with an eye towards more participatory democratic models, their potential for politically empowering women might be limited if the social constraints preventing women from thriving in the industry are not addressed first. And this is something that I cover in the paper in more detail. But the main conclusion is that it is absolutely necessary to combine ICT skills trainings with open data to tackle these issues holistically. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalia. That was great and on the point. I think it was a very concise and very important presentation. I assume people have questions, and if you have questions, you can put them into the Q&A, and then we can see whether we want to address them either in written form or park them later for the discussion afterwards. But I would say we move on with the next speaker, James Madison. James is a consultant at the Open Data Institute, and he has worked over the last 4 years with the public sector to explore how better use of data can enable more effective local services and help cities to solve multi-stakeholder challenges. He's also one of the creators of ODI's Openly Licensed Data and Public Services Toolkit, and he will speak about using open data for public services. James, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Give me 1 second and I will share my slides. Hopefully everyone can see that. So I'm going to talk today about our entry to the Situating Open Data book, which unfortunately I can't actually claim to be one of the authors for, but all of the authors who were originally at the Open Data Institute have since left, and I've picked up a lot of the work around open data and public services from there on. For those of you who aren't aware about the Open Data Institute, we're an organisation very much working to a vision and a mission. We want a world where data works for everyone, and we work with companies and governments to build an open and trustworthy data ecosystem. As I'm sure you're all aware, because a lot of people on this call will be working for similar mission-driven organizations. We're one of many organizations working towards a good balance between encouraging and restricting how data is collected and used. We worked on a research and development program looking at a number of different projects, all of which aim to increase the way that people understand, use, collect, share, maintain data. And one of those focus areas was using open data for public services. Traditionally, the UK government has done a fairly good job of advocating for and publishing open data. This hasn't always translated over into local authority maintained shared data. Local governments, of course, provide essential citizen services, but are often swamped by demand in an environment of increasing populations, budget cuts, and limited resources.
I think we lost him for a second, but let's give him a minute to rejoin.
I think I might have dropped off there. Give me 1 second.
No worries, he's rejoining.
Hopefully people didn't lose. I think I was. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
I seem to have a very bad connection. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay. Apologies, for some reason my connection is really poor today. So I'll pick up where I left off. As I was saying, local governments provide essential citizen services, but are often swamped by demand in an environment of increasing populations, budget cuts, and limited resources. And we believe that opening data apologies, for some reason my connection is absolutely terrible at the moment. Perhaps it might be better to move on to another speaker and
yeah, we can come back to you. Danny, do you want to get another speaker? And I can share the slides when James comes back to improve the connection.
Well,
Yep, Anna, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think Anna wants, yeah.
All right, cool. Okay, so I'm next going to introduce Eveline. So Eveline Vlassenroot holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in communication sciences. Having completed additional courses in information management and security, she joined the research group for media innovation and communication technologies at Ghent University in 2017. She is involved in projects related to e-government and web archiving. Eveline, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Anna, for introducing me. So I hope you're all hearing me quite well. So for today, I didn't prepare a presentation. I wanted to keep it rather informal. So I hope my message about our contribution will be clear. So I'm a co-author in this article on decentralized open data publishing. I'm a researcher at the University of Ghent. And I'm also currently involved in projects related to interoperability and standardization trajectories for the Flemish government. And I also study the adoption of data standards. So today I want to talk a bit more on this contribution on the decentralized publishing of open data. And indeed, the initial problem we are addressing in this chapter is from a more technical perspective. And although I'm not an expert, I will try to explain to you some common problems you are experiencing with the publishing of open data, and particular in the public transport route planning ecosystem. So I will also explain how this problem is not only of a technical nature, but how it can also be seen from other perspectives. So the initial problem is that the ways in which open data is published at the moment impacts the end user and also the reusers. So if you could change the way in which open data operators publish their data, these reusers and end users actually could benefit from that. So what we noted or what we saw in our study is that data is being published at the moment in two ways, or to say in common. So first one being RPC or APIs, and researchers can obtain information for a set of parameters, but often these operators impose limitations to reusers due to computational costs that will increase also when the amount of reusers grows. So this is quite a problem. The second one is being that operators publish their data via data dumps in several standard formats, which third parties can integrate and reuse in their application. But such a data dump approach fosters the creation of data silos. So a solution for these two problems lies in the linked connections framework. So this framework allows operators to share data in a cost-efficient way that is optimized for performing route planning algorithms. So in this linked connections framework, it actually follows the linked data principles by assigning unique identifiers to every element of a public transport network and relying on common semantic vocabularies to provide a description of each item. So I want to list three advantages of this framework. So the first one being that it is intended to increase the interoperability of these public transport data sets, which reduces at the same time the adoption costs of data for open data reusers. And furthermore, this framework also allows clients to cache the fetched data fragments in memory. So this enables offline execution of new queries, which is not possible when you query via an API. Next to this framework, it also provides a solution that supports the privacy by design. So since the calculations are performed on the client side, the users are not required to share their personal data over a server or to third-party servers. So these are some of the advantages for data publishers, but in our paper, we also studied how this approach may impact reusers and end users. So for the reusers, they now have unrestricted access to the data, mainly because the data becomes cacheable and the processing load of the calculating routes is now moved to the client side. And it also supports new types of queries. For example, an open data reuser could directly use the linked connections dataset from the bus and tram operator of a city and combine them with available, for example, city or bike or car open data sets to support new types of queries and also render new route alternatives. So this is without being restricted by pre-calculated routes offered by an API or the overhead of having to integrate the data dump first. And then last, for the possible end users, we created an application based on these linked connections. And we also conducted some qualitative research with these end users. And actually we learned that the majority of the users, they give a lot of value to some of the features of the linked connections applications. such as the offline querying, but also the safeguarding of their privacy. So to finish off, I want to mention that we have been able to observe that even if this technology requires further work, the potential benefits of this approach are aligned with the ideals of open data, of fostering innovation, boosting the economic growth, and providing solutions for more specific necessities. For example, with this approach, public transport accessibility for people with with disabilities can also be made possible if you are a software developer. So I also wrote down some other challenges which might be interesting to discuss later. So some challenges are, how can we apply this decentralized approach of open data publishing to other sectors other than the open data, the transport sector? And how can we get operators to publish according to this framework? Because I think it's not only a matter of technical experience and stuff, but it also requires some change management. And also I want to mark that this approach comes from an academic endeavor, and it's being implemented in Belgium with the efforts of Open Knowledge Belgium. So that was my story. I hope it's clear, and if you have questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eveline. I'm sure I have a few questions myself, but please feel free to add your questions in the chat. I'll continue now with our next author and speaker, Camila. So Camila Salazar holds an MSc in Applied Social Data Science from the London School of Economics and Political Science. She has experience as a data analyst in open data initiatives, training and research projects across Latin America, and has worked as a data-driven journalist for international media organizations. Camila, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna. Just gonna share my screen quickly. Okay, so I wanted to present, well, the paper that I co-wrote with two of my colleagues from Paraguay, Juan Pane and Julio Macielo, and it's about the cost of late payments in public procurement. So this was a case study about using open procurement data in Paraguay. And as you know, public procurement is one of the biggest markets in the world. So having open data sets related to public contracting is quite relevant to study how the government is spending their money. So in this research, we're specifically focused on the last stage of the procurement process, which is the implementation or the payment stage. And our idea was to analyze how the delay in payment. So as you know, governments sometimes take too much time to pay their suppliers. So we want to estimate first, how was this affecting suppliers and what was the total cost of late payments. And this is important and relevant because sometimes if suppliers know that the government is going to pay them, not going to pay them on time, they might incur in financial costs. This might cause firms to go out of business, and they might even decline to do business with the government, which at the end will reduce competition and exclude relevant actors from the procurement system. So what we did is we used open contracting data from Paraguay. And if you're interested in analyzing procurement data, Paraguay has one of the best quality data related to procurement. It covers all the stages. And we were able to get data even from the invoice data. So we were able to track a single contracting process from the beginning and then track it to the invoice, to when it was paid. And then even there was detail on the different stages of the payment process. We analyzed data from 2011 to 2017 and around 377,000 invoices. And for the analysis, what we did is that we first run some descriptives and then use an econometric technique called survival analysis to estimate what type of variables were affecting that delay in the payment. And then we did a simple cost estimation using the average lending rate of the market, and then the amount of the invoices and the delayed as a fraction of a year. What we found is that international practice suggests that invoices should be paid in at least 30 days or less. And we found that 92 of suppliers in Paraguay received their payments in more than 30 days. And even if there were local regulations that allowed payments to take up to 60 days, almost half of the payments took 60 days or more. With our descriptive analysis also, we were able to identify, and you can see these plots, these are the different stages of the invoice, of the payment process. So we were able, with that disaggregated data, to identify in which particular stages of the process were having, there were more delays. So for instance, in the first stage of the process was the most problematic in terms of the delays. So we were able to analyze this by year, identifying the public entities that were taking the longest to pay. And so we can focus our recommendations and effort on those particular areas. In terms of the cost estimation, we estimated that the cost of late payments was of around $81 million, which is 0.2% of the GDP, more or less. And then just to sum up a bit of the results that we did, we were able, as I said, to identify the stages of the payment process that were causing most of the delays. We also, and I didn't present like the table with the full results here, but running the econometric analysis, we were able to identify key variables affecting the delays. So for instance, when contracts were paid using treasury funds, that it's basically funds collected through taxes, these were the invoices that took the longest to pay in comparison, for instance, when entities use public credit funds for the payments. We also identified that the amount of the invoice affected delays, the type of purchases. So for instance, services were paid faster than public infrastructure works, and the size of the entity as well. So identifying this, we were able to draw some recommendations on where there could be improvements in the payment process. So for instance, if you would set clear deadlines in the first stages of the process, this could reduce the cost by half almost. And if the deadline was established in 45 or 30 days since the invoice was issued, then the total payment duration cost could be reduced by 42 or 52% respectively. And then some of the lessons learned is that open procurement data can be used definitely to spot inefficiencies in the process and make recommendations. This was a good example in Paraguay, as I said, that has really good quality data. But for instance, this can be replicated in other countries. I currently work as a lead data analyst at the Open Contracting Partnership, and we promote open data specifically related to public contracts. So at OCP, we also actually use this methodology to replicate it to analyze delays in other stages in the contracting process. And we were able to do this using open data in the Open Contracting Data Center from other countries such as Portugal, Chile, and we have also a lot of publishers around the world. So I guess these are the key lessons that could be taken from this research. As I said in the paper, there is more detail about all the the methods, methodology. There's also the code that we use to analyze the data. So it's fully open if you're interested in replicating this. And of course, as I said, if you're interested in using this in other countries, you can ping us at data@opencontracting.org, and we can share with you the methodology and also help you access data related to procurement in other countries. So thank you so much.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that presentation. And yeah, Patrick, on to you.
All right. So thank you very much for that, Camila. Very insightful, really. We move on to the next speaker, and that's Miko Peñares, who'll be talking about localizing global commitments, open data in subnational contexts in Indonesia and the Philippines. Michael is the managing consultant at Step Up Consulting and leads several data projects, data development projects globally, especially in research and open contracting and inclusion in Africa and Asia, funded by HIBOS, database road asset management capacity building for UNDP in the Philippines, labor market information for ILO in Myanmar, results measurement on road governance projects in Vanuatu, and labor market data project visibility for Indonesia funded by GIZ. So Michael, well, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Patrick, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. If I sound and look like I just got out from bed, that's actually the case. You're right, because it's like 11 o'clock. Sorry, it's 11:45 my time here, midnight. So apologies for the lapses and whatever I'll be saying. So I don't have a presentation, just like Eveline, but I'll be speaking through the paper. Special shout out to Francois there, who's also attending, and also Tim Davis. Okay, so as we have known, open data is a movement, especially in the developing country contexts, like for example, the Indonesia and the Philippines are conditioned by global commitments, or global push, or global movements, if you like. So if you can see, when I was part of the research project that Tim Davis, also Silvana and Francois, people here were involved in 2013 in the Open Data in Developing Countries project. Open data as a practice, even in countries, let alone subnational context, is fairly new. So I think in 2015, I think during that time, well, in 2011, when Open Government Partnership was actually one of the was organized, and it's one of the forerunners for open data movement in this space. I think there were 75 country and 15 local governments who signed up and also made around 2,500 commitments. 5 years or 4 years down the line, when ODDC was actually implemented, there are roughly around 73 subnational, 73 countries with 1,894 commitments that are addressing local issues. So my point of interest here in this chapter was actually to ask the question, what's driving localization of the open data agenda? How do localization processes happen? So in the literature, for example, you can see that a lot of localization processes are actually happening from more of a top-down perspective, where, for example, country governments are actually signing up to something, and then eventually they're actually asking local governments to sign up and do something as a part of their commitments in the global stage. So, but one of the papers, for example, that ADB produced some 4 years ago was saying that, you know, localization is not just about integrating all this global agenda into what the local can do, but it's actually about empowering local actors in terms of finding their space in the local agenda and also implementing what is it that is relevant into their own contexts. So why am I looking at both Indonesia and the Philippines? Because these two countries are the pioneer member countries of OGP. And when the time that they joined, they were also the first few ones from the developing country space that were actually pushing aggressively on publication of open data sets, at least at the national level. And then later on, when they did their national action plans for the OGP, they inserted several provisions there on local government units actually subscribing to publication of data and others. So we're doing, in the paper, we're actually discussing two case studies, one which is a city in Banda Aceh in Indonesia, and the other one is a province in the Philippines, the local government of Bohol. And what we're actually looking there is how are these processes of localizing global commitments happening. So in the case, for example, of Indonesia, in Banda Aceh, what actually happened there was that Banda Aceh was considered one of those that were actually ripe for open data in e-governance. The same is true with the Philippines province of Bohol because of the local context of, because of local dynamics as well as the local political, how do you call it? The local political systems that are in tune, for example, with transparency and accountability initiatives. I don't have much time on discussing what happens between these two countries, but I'll just go directly straight to the lessons that these two subnational governments are actually offering us. Of course, what happens is that there's, of course, we always say that political leadership is important in these processes. If there's a tone at the top that actually says that we're pushing for open data and public openness of data infrastructures, and then that's actually matched with also a strong political leadership that's leaning towards transparency and accountability on the subnational space, these types of things happen. But it's not only that. If you don't have a vibrant civil society that's actually working towards transparency and openness as well, pushing that demand to become more relevant in the case of the subnational government, that also does not happen. But also with what we're seeing also in these two subnational contexts, because open data is fairly new, a lot of the agenda for transparency and accountability and open data is actually pushed forward with strong donor support. So that's in the case, for example, of Indonesia, that's USAID, for example, working there on a transformasi program. In the case of the Philippines, it's actually DFAT working on a massive road governance program. So the fourth one, which is important, and I think Natalia also hinted to in the last, in her contribution to this chapter, is the great role for capacity building in terms of ensuring that you're not actually publishing data out, but somebody's actually using it. Because we all know, for example, that even if we're just pushing out data without anyone using it and without any local relevance, and this will be hardly sustainable. And for us, it's very important for what we see in both researches is that a problem-driven open data approach is critical. And by that, I mean it's important that open data is used to solve problems. Because if it's only for just transparency and accountability purposes, it's actually, there are actually problems in terms of sustaining the interest of people and users in the process. So some challenges in this process, I'd like to end here. Sorry.
1 minute. 1 minute.
Oh, yeah, great. Yeah, this is the last one. So just a few challenges here. Sometimes in localizing global commitments, we oftentimes treat local governments as recipients of something. So they just practically just receive something. That is actually very flawed, because if that is the case, then there's a big problem in terms of ownership. So the next one is it's important to have legal institutional frameworks in place. In both countries, there's none when they started, and then they're catching up along as in the process. And then there's importance of active participation of people and technical interventions in terms of empowering people to do something about the data, not just publishing it. And finally, in the case of both countries, I think political transitions play a significant role, not only at the national level, but also at the local level. So if people that are actually committing to open data processes are gone because of local elections, then you have a whole set of dynamics setting in. So Jorge, thanks, and I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very much, Mako. You don't exactly sound like someone who's just waking up, although you look like you made one anyway. Right, we move on to the next speaker chapter. We stay in Indonesia with Ilham Srimaga. He's a researcher and director in Negantara. He holds a master's degree in development studies and a bachelor's degree in informatics from the Bandung Institute of Technology. He has conducted research on issues related to open data, ICT, development, governance, and public policy. He's also a practitioner of ICT, as the research will tell us, and governance, which includes work in developing data, revolution strategies and governance, and in the social sector. So Ilham will speak to the topic, his title of his work, Closing the Gaps in Open Data Implementation at Subnational Government Level in Indonesia. The last but far from the least. Ilham, you have the floor.
Are you unmuted, Ilham?
Hello, yes. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm still in mute mode. Yes. Thank you very much for this question. It is very important. I'm very happy to present our paper. My paper is about closing the gaps in open data implementation at subnational level, government level in Indonesia. It is related with the story that Michael presented about the story of localizing global commitment in Indonesia. But my story is in other areas in Indonesia, that is in Java Island in Bojonegoro. Bojonegoro is a place that is a district that have a local leader that is very transparent and very enthusiastic with open data. But we have the problem. But this is the background of our research is open data is not always beneficial to government and TSO. They don't always get benefit from open data already open. Maybe yes. Maybe is challenging for us. But why this happened? This is because in our research we found that open data when the data is open is not always beneficial for government and CSOB because there is two issues, that is two issues. First is data quality is still low, and the other issue is actor capacity in utilizing data is low. So data is not easy to be used. This is when this become the gaps for open data. But I will give a little background, more background. Actually, in the government in the government that we conduct research is first. This is the first time when open data is implemented. They find this is there is allowed using of data, but after that they make some improvement. Why this is the root of gap, root of the gaps. One aspect that causes the gap is data format. This data format of representativeness data format of issue of representativeness. Most available data format is aggregated data. Single data format is quite rarely. Unavailability of single data format might cause difficulty for government and also for civil society to get the data, to use the data to get the data quality. This because the availability of data because the data that is open is only in aggregated format. Updating data needs update. For example, why updating that data needs new census take long time process to make new data created. This why difficult data is I'm sorry, yes, is difficult to obtain qualified data. So our research find sorry, our research find that the local government try to closing the gaps by introducing single data formats and also increasing participatory data collecting and increasing utilization of ICT. This is conducted for improving the data quality. They call this agendas as a data revolution. We emphasize in our paper the importance of single data formats. That it will support the openness of the data. Why should we use single data? Because only when facts of each data is countable, then update data can follow any change data object, and thus it also ensures data quality is guaranteed. And for example, data of maternal health, data that should be available is that data that represent condition of individual pregnant woman instead of aggregated data that aggregated data of number of pregnant women in one district. Actually, when the first open data.
Ilham,
Yes.
one more minute.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Yes. And our conclusion, local initiative of open data may bring significant impact when accompanied by initiative on quality data improvement. It reflected in our transformation story in presented this book. The story recalls how a small residency in the middle of a forest in Java Island, namely Bojonegoro, implemented open data and accompanied it with data revolution initiative. This is initiative of single data implementation, expansion of participatory public in data collection, and IT utilization for producing data with better quality. And finally, this increased the impact of data implementation. That's all. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Ilham.
Okay, thank you.
That was very informative. We shouldn't forget the last speaker, who was not planned to be last, but who might have a better connection now. James, are you still with us? And if so, could you maybe can we keep to maybe 4 minutes? Do you think that's possible? Maybe 4 or 5 minutes?
We can certainly try.
Let's try. Okay.
Would it be all right if you could share the slides on your end, and I'll just prompt as and when we move to the next slide? Is that okay?
Sure, I think the organizers can do that.
I can do that too, if needed.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Here you go.
Great. You can skip straight to the fourth slide because I'm assuming that's where we were when I disconnected. Traditionally, the UK government has a very good track record for publishing open data and advocating for open data, but that hasn't necessarily translated across to local government. And that's quite unfortunate because through a lot of the work that the ODI has done in the past, we see the value that open data has in terms of streamlining processes, enabling innovation, and improving kind of trust and accountability as well. Please move to the next slide. So we undertook a piece of research looking at what existing open data initiatives there were within the public sector, both at national government level and local government level, but with a particular focus on public services. We wanted to know what was out there and how we could make that more visible, particularly for people in local authorities, so that they can learn from examples of best practice. So the way we went about that is by engaging in user research with a number of people from local authorities and from national government as well. This is just a range of the types of people or the types of roles rather that we engaged with throughout the process, predominantly focused on service delivery managers, data reusers and digital transformation leads, but with some senior people mixed in, some experience from a policy and compliance perspective, and also other people who are strong advocates of data use within local and national government. Next slide, please. We also used data ecosystem mapping as a way to explore how public services are already incorporating open data into their approach. Next slide, please. For those of you who aren't familiar with the idea of a data ecosystem, it's a way to visualize, understand, and communicate how data is published, accessed, and shared, and used by different people and organizations. So we used it to identify how data is moving around a service, which organizations are involved, and how they're improving the way that they run the service through the use of data. Next slide, please. There are three patterns that we noticed emerging from all of the examples that we looked at. These are better access to public services, which directly benefits citizens and businesses, improvements in service efficiency, which benefits the people working within the local authority or government department, and improved policy and general decision making as well. Next slide, please. Here's a quick example. This isn't from the report that formed our book entry, but this is a project that we've worked with and supported. Oxfordshire Cycling Infrastructure Evaluation was basically a project where people in Oxfordshire mapped out the cycling infrastructure in the local area, and they used a particular auditing tool that was created for the project. So that's an example of how they were trying to improve service efficiency by encouraging cycling groups to go out and map their own routes. The local government or local authority then published a map of the data and also published the data as open data on GitHub, which is an example of increasing access to citizens. And then finally, they used that map to make better decisions about the infrastructure. And a nice tidbit, it's also being rolled out in another area as an example of best practice. Next slide, please. There are lots of drivers that were recognized for open data enabled services. Organizational collaboration was really important. Quite often in the UK, public services can't just be delivered by local authorities or the national government. There also need to be a mix of other stakeholders involved. Having a good data infrastructure is really important, and having as part of that, having good technological infrastructure, people with the right skills and understanding is also really important in making sure that an initiative can happen. Standards were recognized as really important. They play a big role in being able to use data from different sources and to make it work for your purpose. Senior level championing is one of the biggest blockers in local authorities in the UK because there's historically issues with bringing senior stakeholders on board with the idea of data and digital transformation. And so winning over senior level champions was really important for getting a lot of the initiatives off the ground. Data intermediaries can play a big role in providing support around the access, use, and sharing or publishing of data, particularly when a local authority or a government department doesn't have a lot of experience in that domain. We recommend that all local authorities who are looking to implement a new service or redesign a service using data approach it with a problem focus in mind, because otherwise you can lose sight of what your users need. And we recognize that openness allows for more innovation, particularly that first pattern of increasing access to data. And lastly, peer networks are really important in helping people from government to bounce ideas off of each other and learn from each other's best practices. Next slide, please. And ultimately, we made two major recommendations to BEIS, which is the department who are funding our program, which was to fund more public sector organizations to explore new service delivery models with open data, and to invest in improving public sector understanding and capability for using open data in public service design and delivery. Next slide, please. I just wanted to add on an additional bit. So this isn't part of our entry into the book, but as a result of the work that we've done, we developed a free openly licensed toolkit which people in government can use to basically work out how open and shared data can play more of a role in the services that they design and deliver. So if anyone's interested in that, then please just reach out to me and I can share the link with you. We're really interested in seeing how that works in different contexts as well. So the majority of people who've used it have been based in Europe. But if anyone thinks that it might be useful for the work that you're doing, then please feel free to use it. And I think that's it from me. Hopefully that was 4 minutes.
It was a little bit above 4 minutes, but we can say it was 4 minutes. So concluding remarks, actually we invited Stefan Verhulst, who also organized the original research symposium. That was the starting point for this book. And Stefan, would you like to say a little bit about the book and how you would maybe position it in current trends in open data research and just in general in what is going on in open data?
Sure. Thanks, Danny, and thanks everyone. I'm delighted to be part of this, and especially delighted to see the outcome of our Open Data Research Summit that it's amazing took place 2 years ago in Buenos Aires, and it was great to see you all there. And since then, unfortunately, things have happened, as you might have experienced. And I was actually planning on, as I told Francois, planning on wearing the fabulous T-shirt that we designed for that event, so that I could at least share and celebrate in this book. Unfortunately, the weather didn't collaborate, and it is freezing at the moment here in New York City. So I decided to actually prevent getting sick and wear something warmer. Anyway, having said that, I would congratulate the editors and the contributors to this amazing collection, and especially I like how Danny and Anna and others have framed the issues within the situation of open data. And I think I especially like the way that Danny opened this up by saying that this is not just about open data sets, but that it actually is really about open data settings, and that we have to become smarter about how open data is being used, but also how ultimately we can start reusing data within a particular kind of setting. What are the conditions? What determines success? And how can we go about leveraging data in a way that really contributes to society as envisaged? I also liked of course, the concept of ecosystems that was emphasized throughout all the presentations, and especially Anna's notion of gateways and gatekeepers, I think is an important one to keep in mind when we understand the political economy of data, which I think was also touched upon by a few that was said here. And again, the whole purpose of the Open Data Research Summit was to actually become more data-driven about the use of data. And as some of you know, I've been whining for the last few years that actually the data space is probably the least data-driven space in government quite often. And I'm delighted to see that all those that presented today actually have really contributed to making data, and especially the reuse of data, more data-driven. Just a few reflections, Danny, when you said, how does this fit within the current discussions and also the way to think about open data moving forward? Some of you might know the last few months we've been engaged in really soliciting input from a variety of stakeholders on, has open data been situated, which is another concept of Danny, another concept with the term situation. On the one hand, you can think in terms of the situation of open data, but also has open data situated, i.e. has it arrived in achieving all the objectives that we hope to achieve? And I think the big message was that we still have some work to do in order for open data, and especially the reuse of data, to really achieve all the objectives that we hoped to achieve when we set out on this trajectory. And then there are 4 big areas that were identified, which again were areas that relate with what was discussed today. One was that we have to become more purpose-driven, and I think several of you already emphasized the need to have a more problem-driven kind of release of open data. The question here is, of course, again, coming back to Anna's earlier reflection on power dynamics in this space, who determines the purpose is going to be, of course, equally important as who is releasing the data. And I think that's something perhaps for future research to try to understand on how purpose can be defined, how you deal with the political economy of even defining a problem and situating that within a particular kind of local context. Second big area was about going beyond government data. Several of you, Eveline, also emphasized that this is more about reuse of data, not just opening data, and I think that's an important development. Thirdly, we really have to take not just the release of data as the central focus, but also how to do this in a responsible way, i.e. how do we also embed data, individual and personal data rights within the open data movement. It's interesting to see that the data space actually has all kinds of tribes actually around particular kind of issues that they care about. And I think we have to actually bring them all together and really try to figure out how do we do this in a more responsible way. And lastly, which would not be a surprise to many here, is that we actually really have to focus on improving open data at the subnational level, because there is a realization indeed that actually the real value of open data is local. And I think that was the big message that we started with, and that's also where I will end, where we really, if we really want to understand how open data is situated, we really have to also take a local perspective, because that's where the rubber hits the road, and also how indeed people's lives can be served by open data. With that, Danny, I saw you became very nervous that I would go on and on. So I'm gonna halt here and again congratulate everyone with the achievement, and may everyone buy the book for sure, and spread it widely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you.
Great.
Jorge,
So
yeah, go ahead.
We will move with the questions. We still have 12 minutes of the end, so let's try to go through them. Going through the votes, we have 6 questions, so we're going to try to address them as much as we can and in the priority that they were sent. So the first question is by Joran to Eveline. Eveline, Joran asks, how can we as local government stimulate transport companies to deliver the right types of data to the city? What if they don't see the advantages or don't want to see the advantages?
Oh, okay, thank you for this question, Joran. It's very interesting, as I also marked it as a challenge. So how can we get these data publishers to adopt the framework of linked connections and to publish their data more efficiently? Or related, which factors can enhance this adoption, and maybe can governments play a role in this and lead the publishers in the right direction? So I think there is not one golden answer to this, but I think it will be an interplay of different factors, such as, for example, trainings, supporting mechanisms, financial incentives, some guidance programs. And you mentioned that maybe obligation could be a solution, but then I think there is also the question of compliance that comes into place. So when are you compliant, or when do you comply with this obligation? And then more importantly, also who will do these assessments? So these are also questions we are asking ourselves within the Flemish government, if we can play a role. And we also try to experiment with this new framework. We try to do our best to get these trainings to data publishers, but indeed it's a difficult question. Who should do this? It's a question of governments. So I hope I have somewhere answered your question, and if not, Joran, you can always contact me.
Thank you, Eveline. The next question is from Francois to Camila. Camila, were the findings presented to government procurement? And if so, what was the response by the government?
Yeah, so we actually presented the findings to different government authorities, so the Ministry of Finance and the Public Procurement Authority that was in charge of the payment. So we presented this to officials and kind of shared the paper and then the recommendations that we shared. So the response was really good. I work with researchers from Paraguay who have a really good relationship with the public authority. So luckily there's this channel of how to channel those recommendations into actionable reforms in the payment process. So currently, as I said, Paraguay's implemented a lot of changes in terms of data-driven approaches to monitor procurement, etc. So it's a good feedback loop that has gone there. And also in terms of this specific research, this was also featured in national media. So it was also a good way to socialize the results that, as I said, can be relevant. It's a use of open data that can be translated to relevant findings for a broader audience besides public policy officials.
Thank you, Camila. Then we have a general question that for now, 2 panelists have volunteered to answer. So I'm going to read the question. Alan asked, in what ways do which aspects of context make a difference to the value that open data can add? Is it possible to say something that goes beyond it depends? In effect, generating general lessons from local contextual explorations. And we're going to hear from Anna first. Anna.
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think there's many aspects, so I'm just going to touch on one. I had to prioritize because there's so many. So I want to focus on what the way open data initiatives are adopted and how the ownership plays out. So I'm not just saying like who owns the data, is the concept and the initiative, does it come from the local context? Does it come from the needs and the problems, the purposes that are happening? And this is really very much to kind of avoid techno-solutionism that we see, and that's why like things that get trickled down, they haven't worked so well. Even legislatively, we haven't really seen adoption. I mean, there have been challenges. James just mentioned the last one at adopting open data at subnational level. So this kind of continues. So we need to start looking at different ways to understand why that is and listening more to what the needs are. And so it depends is really truly, it depends. So we're in a kind of constant state of discomfort, but in a positive way, in a way to make us like challenge our notions of what we're bringing to the table. And that's really important. And this is why contexts are so different. There's no one size fits all, even from country level down. And that's like a key element of this. So to make sure that the value that it brings to open data is sustainability and long-term use. Because if you have the buy-in from the community and it makes sense for the community, then roll it out, and they'll make sure they'll nurture that initiatives and so on. That's it.
Thank you, Anna. And Miko, you are also going to try to answer that question. Happy to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, very quickly. I would just like to say that in the narrative for open data publication and use, it is all about power. So it's the political context that really matters. And Anna has hinted to this when she was talking about gateways and gatekeepers. So in the paper that Francois and I wrote on open contracting and inclusion, we're talking about opportune niches. And when that opportune niche is actually being opened to several actors within government and also civil society and the tech community to take advantage of that moment of data publication and data use, then that has to be taken advantage of. But it's very important to look into readiness here. And the readiness is not only about the level of government, but also about users. And by users, I talk about the tech communities and the intermediaries and so on. Because if you don't have these elements that actually makes data publication on one side possible and data use and intermediation processes on the other side feasible, then nothing is actually happening in that space, at least from my perspective, from where I'm seeing these things panning out in the local contexts.
Thank you, Miko. Any other panelists or editors that want to chip in on this question?
There's so much to talk about, but sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add, well, mine is really raising more questions, more or less. I think Alan asked a very important question, can it go beyond it depends? Well, I do think that it shouldn't necessarily go beyond, the answer shouldn't always be it depends. I tend to think that apart from local, or rather implementations in local, they draw from general or global principles that could apply across board. Of course, there's no one size fits all, but then there are principles that could apply across. And this, I think, is an interesting topic for research. All right, what really applies. And this requires looking at different contexts, global, local context, subnational or country context, to see what implementations take place there that are common in the other areas, other regions, other local subnationals and all that. Yeah, just my thoughts.
Thank you, Patrick. Danny, were you gonna say something? No worries. you had all the.
No, I was just saying we could have many interesting discussions on that. I mean, I would have a question for Alan, where his question comes from what standpoint, because I was often asking myself, when these questions are asked, how can we go beyond the context and beyond it depends. Which position does it come from, or whose position does it come from? But we don't have to talk about it now. Maybe we can take other questions.
Cool, no worries. I will just highlight that Alan shared a blog post in the chat, so where some of these, where that comes from, can be seen. So you can read more about there, and it also relates to some other points in the book. Okay, we have another question for Eveline, but while we are addressing these two last questions, there is gonna be a survey about the event, so you can give us feedback. We are always using it to improve how we do these kind of events. Please answer it. And the last question is for Eveline. So Eveline, are you aware of any models to incentivize that sharing of data between stakeholders?
Yes, so I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, but I'm just going to give some reply. So if you mean by incentivizing models, I am aware of some, but in Belgium, and some models are that in Belgium we have a system where you can apply for funding if you have an innovative project. So this is also to encourage stakeholders to work together and receive some funding if it is So this is actually rewarding, and it will also get you the recognition of these primary sources. So I'm aware of some, but only in my own country. So if you want to learn, get to me and teach me some more about these models, I would be very interested. So I think I will get in touch with you, Justin. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Eveline. And lastly, the last question is for Miko. Oh, and Miko answered it in the chat. So I'm just gonna quickly, in the minute that we have left, cover two questions that were asked and answered in the chat. Alan asked Natalia about if there are other models for incentive for empowering women, and if the context of Kosovo made a difference. And Natalia replied saying that yes, that she published a paper in 2018 researching other types of empowerment or models to promote empowerment, but she really liked the kind of holistic approach and the ecosystem approach that the case research in the book had. And she also said that a lot of like the context of Kosovo was very key for how the initiative worked and the results that it had, specifically because of several challenges that exist in Kosovo and the general demand for these kind of approaches. And of course, you can read more about that in Natalia's chapter. And for Miko, there was a question about what kind of formats of ways of hosting data made it easier for the right people to become aware of the processes that were happening and find access and use the data to solve target problems. And Miko answers, and I'm gonna just read it. For me, the answer is a little bit complex there. It is important to look at audience segmentation. What is the nature of the stakeholder? Is he, she, it connected or disconnected? What is the tech capacity? What is their interest? Because the answers to these questions frames the processes and formats, including the types of platforms that we'll need to use. So, well, I think we were able to cover it all, and thank you all for being here. We just ran 1 minute after the end, and thank you to all the presenters, the writers, the editors. This book is really interesting. I invite you all to get it, to read it, and to share it. And thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.